What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. Today we're going to be looking at the Week 2 risers and fallers for fantasy football, who is trending up and down across the entire XFL. We'll also get into some buy low, sell high discussions for trades. But hey, if you guys are looking for XFL fantasy content or just XFL news in general, click that like and subscribe button. We're going to be posting stuff throughout the season, keeping you up to date on everything that's happening. Anyway, not going to waste any more time. Let's get started right away. Alright guys, so as I said, today we're talking risers and fallers, and basically what we're going to do is just go team by team, list all 8 teams here, and just talk about the main risers and fallers in terms of fantasy value that we saw across offenses throughout the entire XFL. Now we'll begin with the Dallas Renegades, and here in terms of risers and fallers, I know there's a bit of panic around the Renegades pass offense, but overall when it comes to their pass catchers, I'm just staying put. We're just going to act like week 1 didn't really tell us anything, because it didn't necessarily tell us much. With Philip Nelson there not being able to throw the ball more than 10 yards down the field, and only really wanting to throw to running backs and tight ends flat, like there wasn't really any opportunity for us to truly see how wide receivers like Jeff Badet and Jazz Ferguson were actually going to produce in the system. So as you guys can see on my website at fantasyaddictionnetwork.com, I've released my updated trade tiers. My trade calculator has been updated with rankings for this week. The Dallas Renegade receivers didn't really receive too much of movement, because we don't know exactly how this offense is going to pan out once Landry Jones is back, and Landry Jones should be back this week. So I'm not really putting them on my risers or fallers for that reason. So that really, slows down or just limits the number of players that we're really going to talk about here. But overall, the main riser that looked really good on Sunday, someone that we want to keep an eye out for, is Lance Dunbar. He had 5 carries for 27 yards, and he had 6 receptions for 29 yards. So overall, very productive day, and it looked really good with the touches that he had. Definitely, you have to keep in mind that with Philip Nelson there, he threw to the running back a lot. We don't know what Landry Jones is going to do, but Dunbar looked good, so his value went up. And conversely, Cameron Artis-Payne is one of the fallers here in Dallas, but not nearly as far as some of the other running backs that we've seen. So Cameron Artis-Payne only had 2 carries for 6 yards. He did have like a 20-yard carry called back, and he also had 4 receptions for 13 yards. So let's just wait and see mostly on this offense, but Lance Dunbar definitely sees a rise. All right, jumping over to the DC defenders. On the risers, we have Eli Rogers. He had 6 receptions for 73 yards. He was the #1 receiver there, at least in terms of targets, for Cardale Jones, and was kind of that safety blanket, but he was getting open a lot. Look for that trend to continue. And then Khari Lee with that nice 39-yard touchdown grab. That was his only catch and technically only target of the day, but also looked really good. And then in terms of fallers for the defenders, Donnel Pumphrey was really disappointing on Sunday. Was barely used in the pass game. He had 4 carries for only 5 yards and only had 1 reception on 3 targets for 3 yards. So just very disappointing all around for Donnel Pumphrey. We were hoping that he would kind of be involved in that passing game. Could definitely change. They should involve him more in the passing game and less in the running game. Let Jhurrell Pressley run most of the carries, but we'll see what ends up happening there. All right, jumping over to one of the most exciting teams in the XFL now, the Houston Roughnecks saw a lot of risers on their offense, none more than PJ Walker. Went 23 for 39 this week, 272 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 4 carries for 26 yards. PJ Walker definitely has what it takes to be the MVP in this league, and could end up winning you a lot of fantasy championships with him on your team. James Butler, the running back there that wasn't even listed on the depth chart before the week, was basically the bell cow for 80% of the game. Had 9 carries for 30 yards and a touchdown. Also had 2 receptions for 20 yards and a touchdown. So definitely a name to keep in mind when looking at your waivers this week. Wide receiver Cam Phillips was tied for the most targets of all the receivers there. He had 4 catches on 9 targets for 67 yards and a touchdown. Definitely going to be seeing a lot of looks there, as he should be the wide receiver 3. And then Nick Holley, who was technically listed on the depth chart as a wide receiver, but I know most fantasy leagues have him listed as a running back. No carries on the ground, but 4 for 5 and 50 yards. Kind of looked like Rex Burkhead out there. All those guys definitely saw a huge rise in their value. And then in terms of fallers, both the other running backs here, Andre Williams and DeAngelo Henderson, did basically nothing. I think Andre Williams was only on the field for like 7 snaps, and Henderson was there for like 1 or 2. So just overall, very disappointing week if you had either of those guys on your team. At this point, you can't start them until you start to see a shift back to them, unless James Butler gets hurt. But that would be the only sudden thing that would change for me. All right, let's jump over to the Wildcats. The Los Angeles Wildcats saw similar things here that we got to kind of keep in consideration, because Josh Johnson wasn't playing, as we kind of did with the Dallas Renegades, but Chad Kanoff did a admirable job taking over. But overall, I was really impressed with Elijah Hood. He had a lot of burst and a lot of power on his runs. He wasn't involved in the pass game, which is a little bit rough, but look for that to change once Josh Johnson gets back. Nelson Spruce, though, is the biggest riser of the entire XFL in terms of the skill position players. 11 catches on 15 targets for 103 yards, was utilized often, and probably would have received even more catches had the Wildcats been able to keep their composure and play well into the second half. And then Jordan Smallwood also looked pretty good. He went 3 for 7, 28 yards, had a really nice touchdown grab. So those are your risers for the Wildcats. In terms of fallers, we saw 2 receivers that were receiving a lot of hype in the offseason that did nothing on Saturday. Saeed Blacknall went 0 for 4. Some of those weren't his fault, but some of them were. And then Tre McBride, he didn't even have any targets on Saturday. So both of those guys are players that are probably drop-worthy in fantasy for the time being. All right, let's jump over to the New York Guardians now. The Guardians saw a few players that stood out that we want to call to attention. Darius Victor definitely played the more prominent running back role in that offense. He had 9 carries for 32 yards and 3 receptions for 25 yards. The main problem with him is the fact that he's probably not going to get a lot of those goal line carries because Tim Cook is there, but definitely going to be utilized a lot. Colby Pearson looked really good. He went 2 for 4 for 44 yards and a touchdown. Almost had another big play that he just dropped the ball, unfortunately, but he looked pretty good other than that one drop. And then Jake Powell, the tight end there, received 6 targets, went 4 for 28. So any tight end that's receiving more than 5 targets is someone that we're going to take a look at. In terms of the fallers, Tim Cook, as I mentioned, will probably continue to see goal line looks, so he definitely retains some value, but only 4 carries for 10 yards, 1 reception for 0 yards. Just very slow. That big boulder that they just use to plow through the offensive line near the goal line, but isn't really going to add any value to his touches. And then Teo Redding, super disappointing week. 1 target, no catches, and just looked like he wasn't really wasn't on the field much and wasn't used nearly as much as we were hoping for. Maybe he'll end up usurping Joe Horn, but we'll see. For now, Teo Redding must stay on your bench. All right, looking at the St. Louis Battlehawks, risers, Jordan Ta'amu looked phenomenal in the Week 1 opener. He went 20 for 27, 209 yards and 1 touchdown. Also had 9 carries for 77 yards on the ground, so definitely going to be challenging PJ Walker for that MVP slot. The running back Matt Jones also looked tremendous. He went 21 carries for 85 yards and was the leading running back on the ground throughout the entire XFL. Keith Ford also looked pretty good, didn't get nearly as many touches, but he went 4 for 26 and scored that nice touchdown run. Pierson-El looked sharp and quick. He had 4 for 4 for 64 yards, including one, I think it was about a 40-yard catch and run play. Definitely looked pretty good out there. Alonzo Russell, much of a speedster guy, but also had a really nice touchdown grab and went 3 for 5, 49 yards and a touchdown. And then Marcus Lucas, 4 for 6 for 40 yards. Any tight end that's going to get that many targets is going to be someone to note. Cole Hunt looks like he's going to be out for the season, but they did re-sign Connor Davis today, so definitely something to keep in mind. Looking at the fallers for the Battlehawks, Christian Michael, he fell really far in our trade value this week. He went 7 for 0 yards, 7 carries, no yards, a fumble, and he had 1 catch for -1 yards. Just absolutely atrocious. He just didn't look ready at all. He didn't look quick. He had no elusiveness or burst, couldn't break any tackles. So we'll see if he can get things into gear here, but overall I think Matt Jones and Keith Ford are going to end up taking over this backfield with him being there, just waiting in the wings for an injury. And then Keith Mumphrey, who a lot of people were excited for, only went 1 for 1 and 12 yards, so definitely seeing a huge fall in his value. And then Cole Hunt, as I mentioned, severe injury, looks like he won't be playing any more this season, so that's another faller for you. All right, jumping over to the Seattle Dragons. In terms of risers, Trey Williams looked really good in this game. This is definitely a 3-headed backfield, which is going to make things hard for fantasy, but 3 carries for 16 yards, but 4 receptions for 5 targets for 27 yards, and that nice touchdown. So overall, definitely someone you want to keep an eye out for. I think that he will pass Jaquan Gardner on the depth chart, especially after that fumble near the end of the game. And then Austin Proehl, 5 for 10, 88 yards, 2 touchdowns, including that one really nice long touchdown. Also had a carry for 3 yards. They did sign another receiver today, so we'll see how that ends up playing into the depth chart. But overall, Austin Proehl looked to be the most dominant force in terms of the pass catchers for the Seattle Dragons. And then in terms of the fallers, Jaquan Gardner, who was listed as the number 1 running back on the day, went 9 for 36 yards, and as I mentioned, he had that one fumble near the end of the game that pretty much cost them the entire game. It was pretty sad to see that, and really just disappointing performance overall for him. No catches on the day, so I look for Kenneth Farrow and Trey Williams to kind of take over that backfield going forward. All right, looking at the Tampa Bay Vipers, our last team here. In terms of risers, Devian Smith, also a tremendous day on the ground, at least for the XFL. 16 carries, 79 yards, also had 1 catch for 8 yards, and he was used primarily on the goal line, so he could be one of your better all-around running backs, so he saw a huge gain in his value. Daniel Williams looked like the clear number 1 receiver there. 6 catches on 9 targets for 123 yards. Could end up being a low-end wide receiver 1 for the rest of the year. And then Jalen Tolliver also looked decent out there. 3 catches on 8 targets for 47 yards. All these guys are your risers in Tampa Bay. And then your fallers, if you valued Aaron Murray high, he definitely let you down this week. 16 of 34. Attempts for 231 yards and 2 interceptions, no touchdowns on the day. Just made a lot of mistakes that it looked like he hasn't really learned his lessons since the days of the AAF. So we'll see if he can turn it around, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a quarterback change coming in Tampa Bay even as soon as next week. So we'll keep monitoring the news for you guys. But anyway, let's get a bit more into our trade talk. We basically, explained the guys that saw the biggest rise and fall in value. And again, as I mentioned, you can find all of these trade values on our website at fantasyaddictionnetwork.com. I even have a trade calculator there. If you plug in your team, you can see if you are attempting to make a trade with a friend, you can see how much it actually impacts your team for the better or the worse. Everything's updated with the rankings for this week, so check that out. There's also a link in the description, or I'll put a little link above, that side, and make sure that you guys can access that website. Again, it's free. Get all those values, will be updated season long. But let's get into some of the guys that we want to look at if you're trying to make some deals this week. Take advantage of the lack of information coming out after only 1 week. Players that I would definitely buy low on would be Jhurrell Pressley, the running back for the DC Defenders. He looked really good, even though he didn't have the stats to show it. I think that the DC Defenders are going to be one of the better offensive teams throughout the year, and as they get some of their pass-catching weapons like DeAndre Tompkins back, the opposing defenses aren't going to be able to shut down the run, and the Dragons should just look to have a really good run defense. So look for Jhurrell Pressley to be one of the more utilized running backs. Plus, he's running in only a 2-back field committee, not a 3-back, which that's definitely worth having in your fantasy league. So he is someone that might have a lower perceived value that you can get at a steal right now. Same thing for Brandon Barnes. Only saw 2 catches for about 40 yards on the day over there in LA, but with Josh Johnson coming back, he looked to be one of the more athletic tight ends and should be one of the better targets in LA, so this might be a good chance to nab him before Josh Johnson comes back. We saw Sammie Coates get 9 targets but only 2 catches for 28 yards. I still believe in him. He was getting open on a lot of those plays. He had a couple of mistakes himself, but they were also double covering him on a lot of those throws. So overall, I think that Sammie Coates, they're not going to be able to double cover him every single week because Philip Walker can go to any of his other guys. They're going to have to try to find different ways to slow down this offense, and I think that will just open up more things for Sammie Coates going forward. So I think this might be your last chance to steal Sammie Coates at a lower perceived value. Already mentioned Elijah Hood is one of my risers. I think that he definitely stands a chance at being one of the more consistent fantasy running backs every week, but it doesn't, because of his lower output in this last week, you might be able to nab him for cheaper than you should be able to. And then both wide receivers for the Dallas Renegades, because I haven't adjusted their value. If people are just looking at the box score from last week, you might be able to get Jeff Badet or Jazz Ferguson for a really cheap price. So definitely put some feelers out there for those guys. And those are some of the players I target this week. Some of the players that I would consider selling high, these aren't players like you absolutely have to sell, but if you can increase the value of your roster, I would look to do so. Khari Lee had that nice 39-yard touchdown for the DC Defenders, but overall, he only received 1 target on the day. And if he didn't get that touchdown for you, you would have been massively disappointed in his performance. Doesn't look like he's going to be a heavy focal point of this offense. I'd rather have a tight end that's getting consistent targets and can score touchdowns rather than one that, you know, had a really nice play, but we'll see how much value he actually holds. If you can trade him for like a Nick Truesdale or just upgrade another part of your roster and pick up Marcus Lucas on the waivers this week, that might be a really good way of boosting your team's value. And then Pierson-El, even though I gave him a lot of praise for how well he did, overall, I think that his value might be a little bit higher right now than it actually should be. You might be able to trade him for someone with a lower perceived value, like a Jeff Badet. So definitely try to see if you can move these guys. It's not a must sell by any means, but if you can increase the value to your team, these are guys that you can move on from and feel good about doing that. And then we'll have this section for some weeks, but in terms of players that I would buy high on, even after a great performance, I think Nelson Spruce is now the clear #1 wide receiver in the XFL in terms of fantasy production. He's only going to get better with Josh Johnson coming into the fray. So there's really no player that I'd rather have than Nelson Spruce. So if you're able to trade for him now before his value goes up even more, that might end up winning you a league. And then Eli Rogers looked to be Cardale Jones' favorite target. Cardale Jones is going to be one of the better passers in this league. So while Rashad Ross still remains the more valuable receiver there, Eli Rogers should have a very nice PPR floor. So if you can convince someone to give him away without, you know, spending your entire team, definitely might be a good buy high last chance moment for these guys. And then in terms of players that I would just be willing to move on from, even if the price is significantly lower than what I paid for them, as I mentioned before, Christian Michael looked terrible this last week. Hopefully some of your league mates didn't watch the games and you can still sell them on the name. If you can sell Christian Michael for anything of value right now, I would recommend doing that, especially if you have Matt Jones. And then Andre Williams, I thought he was going to end up being the better running back here in Houston, and things may change as the season goes on, but because he was a higher draft target, you might be able to get value for him if you try to trade him away now. So it might just be one of those. This is your last chance to get any value for these guys, so consider throwing them into a trade. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Again, we're posting stuff daily for the XFL and for fantasy, across the entire XFL season. So hit that like and subscribe button for more content, and check out my website at fantasyaddictionnetwork.com for waivers, trade ratings, start sit questions, rankings, everything that you need to be able to manage your team throughout the entire XFL season. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.